Emma sat in the small, dimly lit apartment that had once been filled with hope and dreams, but now felt like a cage. The walls, which had once been painted a soft blue, were now cracked and faded, much like the life she had been living for the past few years. The small kitchen, with its chipped mugs and half-empty cabinets, echoed with silence. A silence that had been a constant companion to Emma for as long as she could remember. It wasn't that she didn't want to change. She did. Every day she hoped for something, anything, to lift her out of the darkness that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But no matter how hard she tried, there was always something pulling her back into the shadows. The weight of her thoughts, the heavy burden of self-doubt, and the constant whispers in her head telling her that she wasn't good enough. These things kept her trapped in a cycle she couldn't break. She had tried to make things better before. She had tried to be the person she thought everyone expected her to be. Strong, happy, confident. But those attempts always felt like putting on a mask, something that only hid the truth for a short time. And when the mask slipped, she was left feeling worse than before. She couldn't even remember a time when she felt truly happy. It felt like the world was passing her by, and she was stuck in a place where nothing ever changed. That afternoon, like many others, Emma sat by the window, staring out at the busy street below. The world outside seemed so full of life, so full of people who had everything together. They laughed, they talked, they lived. But Emma couldn't find herself in that picture. She couldn't imagine ever being part of that world. She wasn't like them. She didn't belong. Her mind often went back to the moments in her past that had led her here, the harsh words from people who were supposed to love her, the times when she had been told she wasn't good enough, pretty enough, or smart enough. The voices, both from others and from inside her own head, had chipped away at her self-worth until there was nothing left but a sense of emptiness. She closed her eyes and whispered the words that had become all too familiar to her. I'm worthless. I'm dirty. The words were soft, barely a breath, but they cut through her heart like a knife. She didn't know why she thought that about herself, but it was the only truth she had come to believe. It was as if the world had told her that this was who she was and she couldn't escape it. There was no way out of the darkness, no way to escape the feeling of being unworthy. She pulled her knees up to her chest, hugging them tightly as if trying to hold herself together. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. It felt strange to cry, as though she had forgotten how to feel anything at all. But it wasn't just sadness that filled her heart. It was a deep sense of failure, like she had tried and failed so many times that it was easier to believe she would never get it right. As the minutes stretched into hours, Emma's thoughts wandered. She thought about the people she had known, friends, family, colleagues who seemed to have it all. They were happy, successful, and surrounded by love. She tried to picture herself in their shoes, living a life without the weight of constant self-criticism and loneliness. But every time she tried, it felt as if something was holding her back, stopping her from reaching out for a better life. In her heart, she knew she was capable of so much more. She knew she had dreams and hopes that had been buried under years of hurt and disappointment, but she didn't know where to start. Every step she took toward healing seemed to lead to a dead end, and the thought of trying again felt too exhausting to even consider. The phone on the table beside her buzzed, snapping Emma out of her thoughts. She glanced at it but didn't pick it up. It was probably just another message from someone who didn't understand, someone who expected her to be fine when she wasn't. People often told her to snap out of it, or look on the bright side, as if that would somehow make everything better. But Emma knew it wasn't that simple. The pain she felt wasn't something that could be fixed with empty words or temporary solutions. The silence in the room felt heavy, and for a moment, Emma wondered if she would ever find a way out of it. The thought of being stuck in this endless cycle, of living a life full of pain and loneliness, was almost too much to bear. She closed her eyes once more, trying to block out the world around her, hoping for a moment of peace. But then, there was a soft knock at the door. Emma froze. Who could that be? She hadn't been expecting anyone. She wasn't even sure if she wanted to see anyone, but the knock came again, followed by a voice. Emma? It's me, Jack. I brought you some soup. Jack was a man she had met through a local community center. He had been kind to her the few times they had crossed paths. But kindness had always felt strange to Emma. She didn't know how to accept it, how to believe that anyone could care for her. Still, Jack's words seemed genuine, and part of her wanted to believe in the possibility that someone could care, even if she didn't fully understand why. Emma hesitated, sitting still for a moment. She had never been good at accepting help, never been good at letting anyone in. But for some reason, something about Jack's presence felt different. He wasn't trying to fix her or make her feel better with empty words. He was simply offering a little bit of kindness. And that, in that moment, felt like something she hadn't had in a long time. With a deep breath, she stood up and slowly walked to the door. As she opened it, she found Jack standing there with a warm smile, holding a bowl of soup in his hands. "I thought you might be hungry," he said softly, his eyes kind, but not pitying. "I hope it's okay I stopped by." For the first time in a long while, Emma didn't feel like she was invisible. She didn't feel like she was worthless. She felt seen. The next few days passed in a blur for Emma. The soup Jack had brought her sat untouched on the counter for hours, but his kindness stayed with her long after he had left. She couldn't stop thinking about how different it felt to be treated, like a person who mattered, even if it was just for a short moment. She had always believed that kindness was something you had to earn, something you had to be worthy of, but Jack's simple gesture shattered that belief. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't expect her to be okay, or to immediately open up. He just saw her. And that, more than anything, had made all the difference. Over the next week, Emma continued to visit the community center. It wasn't much, a small building at the edge of town filled with mismatched chairs and tables. But it was a place where people like her could come for a bit of comfort and warmth. She didn't know exactly what it was that drew her back there, but there was something calming about the place. Perhaps it was the simple, unassuming nature of it. Or maybe it was the people who worked there, people like Jack, who didn't judge and didn't push. She began showing up every day, at first for just a few minutes, then for longer stretches of time. She would sit in a corner with a cup of coffee, watching the world go by. She didn't talk much. It felt safer that way. But Jack was always there, greeting her with a quiet smile and a kind word. It was never forced, never too much. He simply made sure she knew she wasn't alone, and that meant more to Emma than she could explain. One afternoon, as she sipped her coffee and watched the others interact, Jack pulled up a chair across from her. "How are you doing today, Emma?" he asked, his voice gentle but sincere. Emma looked down at her cup, unsure of how to answer. Her mind had been running in circles, as it often did, filled with doubts and worries. But something about Jack's presence made it easier to let down her guard, even if just a little bit. "I'm okay," she said softly, surprising herself with the words. She hadn't expected to say that, but there it was. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't drowning in negative thoughts. The heaviness in her chest had lessened, just slightly, as if the weight was being shared. "That's good," Jack nodded. "It's a small step, but it counts. You're doing better than you think." Emma wasn't sure if she believed him, but his words made her feel lighter. No one had ever told her that before. No one had ever acknowledged the small steps she took, as if they weren't worth noticing. But Jack made her feel like they mattered. As the days passed, Emma found herself spending more time at the community center. She began to participate in some of the activities they offered, simple things like painting, writing, and even yoga. At first, she only watched from the sidelines, feeling too self-conscious to join in. But Jack always made sure to gently encourage her, never pushing, but always there to offer support when she needed it. One afternoon, while Emma was in the art room, Jack came in with a few other volunteers. He stopped by her table where she was quietly sketching and looked over her shoulder. "That's a really good drawing," he said with a smile. "You've got a lot of talent." Emma's face flushed with embarrassment. "It's nothing," she muttered, quickly putting the pencil down. Jack didn't let her brush off the compliment. "No, really, you've got a great eye for detail. Have you ever thought about taking art classes?" Emma shook her head. "I don't think I'm good enough for that. I've never been good at anything." Jack looked at her seriously. "That's not true, Emma. I can see the potential in you. You've got a lot of hidden strengths. It just takes time to bring them out." Emma felt a small flicker of hope rise in her chest, but she quickly pushed it down. She wasn't used to believing in herself, and the idea of pursuing something like art seemed too far out of reach. But Jack's words lingered, like seeds planted in the soil of her mind. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as lost as she thought. The next day, she returned to the center and tried something new. She picked up a brush and dipped it into the paint, carefully starting a landscape on the canvas in front of her. It wasn't perfect, and she wasn't sure it would ever be. But, for the first time in a long while, Emma felt a sense of purpose as she painted. It didn't matter if it was good or bad. What mattered was that she was doing it for herself, and that felt important. As the weeks passed, Emma began to open up more, not just to Jack, but to the other people at the center as well. She began to make small connections with the others, people who had also experienced struggles and pain. It wasn't that they were all fixed or perfect. It was that they understood. They didn't judge. They simply existed in the same space, supporting each other in their own quiet ways. One afternoon, after finishing a particularly difficult painting, Emma found herself sitting beside Jack once again. This time her shoulders were a little less tense and her smile, though small, was genuine. "I did it," she said, looking at the painting. "I actually finished something." Jack looked at the painting, nodding in approval. "You did more than that, Emma. You took a chance. You pushed through the fear. That's something to be proud of." Emma felt a warm sensation in her chest, as if Jack's words had unlocked something deep within her. She wasn't sure what the future held, and she still had. So much healing to do, but she was beginning to understand something important. Maybe she wasn't as broken as she thought. Maybe there was still time to find herself again. Days turned into weeks, and Emma began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't a big, overwhelming feeling that suddenly took over her life. It was small, quiet, almost fragile, but it was there, like a light flickering in the distance, promising that things could be different. Jack continued to be a steady presence in her life, never rushing her, never asking for anything in return. He simply showed up. He was always there with a gentle smile, ready to listen when she needed to talk or offering encouragement when she doubted herself. There was something about his quiet strength that made Emma feel safe. She had never been one to share her feelings easily, but with Jack, it felt like she didn't have to put on a mask. He didn't expect her to be perfect or put together. He just accepted her as she was. It was a strange feeling for Emma. All her life, she had felt like she had to earn people's kindness, to prove that she deserved to be loved or cared for. But Jack didn't ask for any of that. He simply saw her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen in herself for years: worth. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult session of painting, Emma sat in the corner of the community center, staring at her unfinished canvas. Her hand trembled as she held the brush, unsure of what to do next. It felt like everything she touched was imperfect. Her art, her life, everything felt messy, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to fix it. Jack walked in, noticing Emma sitting alone. Without a word, he sat down beside her and looked at her painting. It wasn't the first time he had seen her struggle, but this time there was something different in her eyes. She seemed to be fighting something deep inside her, something more than just the paint on the canvas. "You know," Jack said gently, "sometimes it's not about creating something perfect. It's about letting yourself create something, no matter how it turns out. It's about giving yourself permission to try." Emma bit her lip, feeling a lump form in her throat. "But what if it's not good enough?" she whispered. "What if it's just a mess?" Jack's gaze softened. "Everything starts as a mess. The trick is not to be afraid of it. We all start somewhere. It's the trying that matters, not the outcome." Emma looked down at her hands, still holding the brush. She had always been afraid of failing, of showing her vulnerability to others. It was easier to stay hidden, to not try, than to risk failing and feeling even more worthless than she already did. But Jack's words felt like a lifeline, like someone had finally reached out to her in the darkness. "I don't know how to stop feeling like this," Emma said quietly. "Like I'm not enough. Like everything I do is just not enough." Jack didn't say anything right away. He simply sat there, allowing the silence to settle between them. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke again, his voice gentle and steady. "You're enough, Emma. You've always been enough. You don't need to prove it to anyone, least of all yourself." Emma felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel something other than the constant weight of doubt. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but for that brief moment, she felt seen. She felt like someone understood her pain without trying to fix it. The days that followed were filled with small steps, some harder than others, but all leading her toward a place of healing. Emma continued to visit the community center, continuing with her art, her writing, and even joining a group therapy session once a week. She was still afraid, still carrying the heavy weight of her past, but she was beginning to learn how to carry it without letting it crush her. One evening, after a group therapy session, Emma sat with Jack on the steps outside the center. The evening air was cool and the streetlights flickered softly in the distance. She had just shared something in the session that felt terrifying, a part of her past she had never spoken about before. It wasn't easy, but it was freeing in a way she hadn't expected. Jack sat beside her, his presence steady and calm. "You did great in there," he said quietly. "It's not easy to open up, but you're doing it. You're making progress even when it doesn't feel like it." Emma sighed, looking out at the street. "I don't know how to thank you for everything, Jack. You've done so much for me and I don't even know how to explain what this means." Jack gave a small chuckle, shaking his head. "You don't need to thank me. You've been doing the hard work. You're the one who's been showing up, who's been trying. All I've done is remind you that you're worth it." Emma felt the lump in her throat again, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from the overwhelming feeling of gratitude. She had never felt so supported, so cared for, without any conditions attached. Jack wasn't trying to fix her or make her someone she wasn't. He was simply there, walking alongside her as she took each step toward healing. "I don't feel like I'm worth it," Emma said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm still broken." Jack looked at her, his expression kind but firm. "You're not broken, Emma, you're healing. You're growing, and that's enough. You don't have to be fixed. You just have to keep moving forward." For a moment, Emma said nothing. She just sat there, letting Jack's words wash over her. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect. Maybe it was okay to be in the process of healing. She didn't have to have all the answers or have everything figured out. She just had to keep trying. Over time, Emma began to change. It wasn't instant and it wasn't easy, but the small steps she took each day were starting to add up. She started to believe in herself again, little by little. She began to see herself through a different lens, one that wasn't clouded by the judgment of her past or the harsh voices that had always told her she wasn't enough. She was enough. And through it all, Jack remained a constant presence in her life, not as a savior, but as someone who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. His kindness had been the spark that ignited her healing, but it was her own strength that would carry her forward. The days had started to feel less heavy for Emma. It was as if she was slowly beginning to lift the weight that had been pressing down on her for so long. It was a strange, almost unfamiliar feeling, a sense of lightness like the clouds that had once filled her mind were starting to break apart. She wasn't sure when it had happened exactly, but there was a quiet confidence growing inside her. She had started believing, even if only a little, that maybe she was worth something more than the endless cycle of self-doubt and fear that had once consumed her. Yet, despite these small victories, there were still moments when she felt like the past might come crashing back. Old habits, old thoughts would sneak up on her, and the feeling of being lost would return. On one particular afternoon, when the rain was falling heavily outside, Emma found herself sitting alone in her small apartment, staring blankly at the wall. The old feeling of worthlessness crept in slowly like a shadow, spreading across her heart. She had been making progress, yes, but the voice inside her head still whispered the same old lies. "You're not enough. You're broken. You'll never be good enough." The silence in the room felt suffocating. Emma hugged her knees to her chest, her mind spiraling with all the things she hadn't been able to fix. The artwork she had started seemed to have no meaning anymore, and the progress she had made at the community center seemed so small in the face of everything that was wrong in her life. Her hands shook as she ran them through her hair, trying to shake the feeling that she was still trapped in the darkness. In that moment, she stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the stormy streets below. She felt small, like she was floating in a sea of confusion, unable to find her way to the shore. The thought of reaching out to someone, even Jack, felt impossible. How could she ask for help when she still felt so broken? It wasn't fair to lean on others when she was still struggling so much. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a message from Jack. He had been reaching out to her more often lately, checking in on her after group sessions, offering words of encouragement. She stared at the message for a few seconds, but her fingers hesitated. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know what to say, but then after a long pause, she typed a few words. "I'm struggling today." The message sat there for a while, her thumb hovering over the send button. The idea of reaching out scared her, but there was a part of her that knew it was exactly what she needed. She took a deep breath and with a shaky finger hit send. Almost immediately, her phone buzzed again. Jack's reply was short but comforting. "It's okay to struggle, Emma. You're not alone. I'm here." The warmth in his words hit her like a wave. She had been so afraid to let anyone in, so afraid of being seen as weak. But Jack's message reminded her that struggling wasn't a sign of weakness, it was part of the journey. She wasn't expected to be perfect, and she didn't have to carry everything by herself. Jack wasn't asking her to fix it all at once. He was simply offering to be there, to support her in the tough moments. She stood by the window for a long time, looking out at the rain, the weight on her chest slowly lifting with each passing minute. For the first time in a while, she allowed herself to cry, not out of sadness but out of release. She was tired of holding it all in, of pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. She had spent so many years trying to convince herself that she didn't need anyone, that she could do everything on her own. But now she understood that asking for help didn't make her weak. It made her human. The storm outside continued to pour, but inside, Emma felt a sense of calm starting to settle over her. She wasn't sure how to move forward, but she didn't need all the answers right away. One step at a time. That was all she had to focus on. Later that evening, Emma found herself at the community center again, sitting at one of the small tables with her sketch pad open in front of her. Jack had invited her to come by, knowing that sometimes she just needed a place to breathe. He hadn't pushed her to talk or share anything she wasn't ready for. He had simply offered his presence, and that was all Emma needed. Jack sat beside her, his usual calm demeanor offering a quiet sense of peace. For a while, neither of them said anything. The sound of soft music played in the background, and the low hum of conversation from the other volunteers and members of the center created a soothing atmosphere. It was as if the world was moving on around her, but Emma didn't feel left behind. She just felt grounded. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "How are you doing now?" he asked softly. Emma looked down at her hands, tracing the edges of the sketch pad with her fingers. She didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure what to say. How could she explain the swirl of emotions inside her? The quiet hope, the fear, the sense of not being enough. But then as she looked at Jack, she realized something. She didn't have to explain it all. She didn't have to have everything figured out in that moment. She could simply be, and that was okay. "I'm okay," she said quietly, her voice steady though still soft. I think I'm getting there." Jack nodded, his eyes warm and understanding. "That's all we can do, Emma. Get there step by step." A small smile tugged at the corners of Emma's mouth. It wasn't a big, dramatic change, but it was something. She wasn't expecting everything to be perfect. She wasn't expecting to suddenly feel completely healed. But what she was learning, slowly and with Jack's quiet support, was that she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to keep going. The rest of the evening passed by quietly. Emma sketched a little, talked to a few other people at the center, and even laughed at something one of the volunteers said. It wasn't much, but it was a step toward the person she wanted to be. The woman who could embrace the mess, the brokenness, the imperfect parts of herself, without feeling like she had to hide them away. She was learning to accept herself, to be gentle with herself, and that, in itself, was a victory. As she left the center that evening, Jack walked with her to the door, offering a few parting words of encouragement. "I'm proud of you, Emma," he said. "I know it's not easy, but you're doing it." "You're not alone." Emma woke up to a new kind of morning, one that felt different. The sun was shining softly through her window, and though the world outside was the same, the world inside her seemed to be shifting. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was enough. For the first time in years, Emma didn't feel completely consumed by the weight of her thoughts. The fog that had clouded her mind for so long was beginning to clear. She wasn't healed yet, and she knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be without struggles, but there was something inside her now, a quiet strength, a belief that maybe she could find her way out of the darkness. For the past few months, she'd been on a journey of rediscovery, one that was slow and full of small victories. Each day she had taken tiny steps forward, sometimes unsure of where they would lead but determined to keep moving. And Jack had been there every step of the way, a steady presence in her life reminding her that she wasn't broken beyond repair. She had been scared to trust, scared to let anyone in, but Jack had never pushed her. He had simply been there, showing her that it was okay to take her time, to let the healing unfold as it would. One of the biggest changes in Emma's life had been her art. At first, it had been a way for her to distract herself, a simple way to fill the hours, but over time it had become so much more. Art had allowed her to express the things she couldn't put into words. It had become a safe space where she could be vulnerable without fear of judgment. She no longer saw her art as something that needed to be perfect. She saw it as a reflection of herself, imperfect, raw and real, and that made it beautiful. Now, Emma was standing in front of her canvas again, a soft smile playing on her lips as she looked at the work she had been creating over the past week. It wasn't finished, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she was creating for herself, not for anyone else's approval. For once, she wasn't concerned with whether it was good enough or not. She was simply enjoying the process, and that was enough. "Good morning." Jack's voice broke through her thoughts as he entered the room. He had become a familiar presence in her life, not just as someone who encouraged her, but as a friend who understood the unspoken weight she carried. He didn't need to ask her how she was doing because he already knew. He had seen her journey up close, and he respected her strength even when she couldn't see it herself. "Good morning," Emma replied, turning to face him. She didn't have to pretend anymore. She didn't have to hide the parts of herself she had once been ashamed of. She had learned to embrace her vulnerabilities, to be okay with not having everything figured out. "Your painting looks amazing," Jack said, looking at the canvas with appreciation. "You've come a long way, Emma." She felt a flush of warmth in her chest, not because of the compliment, but because she knew it was true. She had come a long way. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the community center months ago, overwhelmed by pain and fear. She wasn't the same person who had spent so many nights alone in her apartment, convinced that she was unworthy of love or happiness. No, she had transformed. Slowly, piece by piece, she had begun to put herself back together. It hadn't been easy and it hadn't been quick, but she was getting there. "Thanks," Emma said, her voice soft but steady. "It feels good to create something that's just for me." Jack smiled, sitting down beside her. "That's what it's all about, isn't it? Creating for yourself, finding something that makes you feel whole again." Emma nodded. "Yeah, I think so. I used to think everything I did had to be perfect, that it had to meet someone else's expectations. But now I'm just letting myself be. I don't have to hide anymore." Jack's expression softened, and for a moment Emma saw the depth of understanding in his eyes. He had been there for her when she couldn't see her own worth, and now he was witnessing the growth she had fought so hard for. "You've come such a long way, Emma, and I think you're just getting started," he said. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt like the future wasn't something to fear. She wasn't entirely sure what it would look like, and there would still be tough days ahead, but that was okay. She wasn't walking that path alone anymore. She had found a support system, and more importantly, she had found herself again. Over the following weeks, Emma continued to grow, to heal, and to create. She signed up for an art class at the local community college, something she had once thought was beyond her reach. She was still nervous at first, walking into that first class, feeling the old doubts creep back in, but she remembered what Jack had told her. It's the trying that matters, not the outcome. And with that thought in her mind, she stepped forward, ready to embrace the experience. The class was everything she had hoped for and more. There were moments of frustration, of course, but they didn't overwhelm her like they once had. She was learning to see challenges as opportunities for growth, rather than as signs of failure. Slowly but surely, she was building confidence not just in her art but in herself. One evening after class, Emma was sitting at a cafe sipping a cup of tea and working on a new piece. She had become more comfortable in her own skin, more at peace with the fact that life wasn't always easy, and that it was okay to take it one day at a time. As she looked around, she realized that she wasn't the same person who had once felt like she was invisible, lost in the crowd. She had found her voice and she was using it. Her phone buzzed in her bag, and she pulled it out to find a message from Jack. "I'm proud of you. Emma, I hope you know that. Emma smiled softly, feeling a warmth in her chest. "Thank you, Jack," she typed back, knowing that the road ahead would still have its bumps, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of her past or of the mistakes she had made. She wasn't afraid of the days when the doubts tried to return. She had learned that she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to keep going. She took a deep breath and looked at her painting again, the strokes of color on the canvas a reflection of the strength she had found within herself. The painting was unfinished, but that was okay. Life, too, was unfinished. It was a journey, not a destination, and for the first time, Emma was ready to walk that journey, one step at a time with no shame and no fear.